Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to our live session organized by UNAM Youth together with um, Benjamin Ong, the Head of Exploration of UNDP Accelerator Lab Malaysia, and Mr. Hamdan Majid, the Managing Director of Think City. This is a collaboration project between UNAM Youth, iGEM, and also the British High Commission in Malaysia. So a little bit of introduction for our speakers today. I'll start off with Mr. Hamdan. So Mr. Hamdan is the Managing Director of Think City, a social purpose organization with the mission of making cities more people-friendly, resilient, and livable. As a regional city making agency, Think City provides urban policy thinking, management, and implementation of urban solutions while advocating change in the way cities are planned, curated, developed, and celebrated. Mr. Hamdan has been actively involved in shaping urban policy and plans in Malaysia. Our moderator for tonight is Mr. Benjamin Ong, an ecologist by training. Ben managed the Rimba project at the Rimba Ilmu Botanic Garden from 2014 to 2018. He then co-founded the Urban Biodiversity Initiative, UBI, and served as the lead instructor on its Backyard Explorers program. He is the author of The Backyard Before You and won the 2019 BGCI Marsh Christian Trust Award for Education in Botanic Gardens. He joined the UNDP in October 2019. Before we kickstart this fireside session, we have prepared a little bit of an opening remarks. So it's a short speech by His Excellency Charles Hay, the British High Commissioner to Malaysia. Let's play the video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a particularly good evening to all of the younger people who are joining us at this event. My name is Charles Hay, and I have the great honour to be the UK High Commissioner to Malaysia. Now, as you're all probably aware, the International Green Technology Conference and Exhibition, iGEM for short, has established itself to be Southeast Asia's premier trade event for green technologies and eco-solutions. And it's an ideal platform for solution providers and green energy businesses to tap into the fast expanding ASEAN market. The British High Commission is honoured to have been a key collaborator in iGEM for the past few years. And obviously this year, iGEM has gone virtual, like so many other events. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate the Malaysian Ministry of Environment and Water, which is the patron for this event, and the main organiser, the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Centre, for their perseverance and their excellent hard work in managing to lay on such an excellent online event this year, despite all the current challenges. I'm really pleased to be speaking at this Fireside virtual event, which has been jointly organised by the United Nations Association of Malaysia Youth Arm, UNAM Youth, in partnership with the British High Commission in Kuala Lumpur. And I'm excited, just like you, to have Think City's Managing Director, Mr. Hamdan Abdul Majid, as the main feature at this session. I think you'll probably know that Think City is an important social enterprise with a mission of making cities more people-friendly, resilient and livable. And we've seen their work impacting in some of the major cities in Malaysia, so it's great to have him along. And of course the moderator this evening, Benjamin Ong, is a recent Chevening Scholar, which means a British government scholar, who read in the University of St Andrews in Scotland, specialising in sustainable development, so very well qualified to moderate the session this evening. And I'm sure the session will be dynamic and bring great insights and a great conversation. The subject matter of climate change and urban development is particularly appropriate at the moment, given the current global context. Leaders from across the world will travel next November to Glasgow in Scotland to take part in the COP26 summit on climate change hosted by the UK government, supported by the Italian government. And delivering a successful COP26 is a top priority for the UK government. We want the event to mark a clear step forward in global efforts to drive down emissions and tackle the impact of climate change. And cities are at the centre of this transition. Governments across the world, of course, at the moment are tackling the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has devastated economies and societies across the globe. That's the number one priority, and we're rightly, of course, focused on caring and curing. But in our response, we also need to consider the crucial challenge of climate change. Climate change has even greater potential to devastate lives across the world, across the medium and longer term. Already, countries across Asia, including Malaysia, are facing the impacts of destructive and extreme weather events, and the frequency of such events is set to accelerate in the coming years. So as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, our collective recovery needs strong roots in a greener and more resilient global economy. And cities, of course, drive economic growth. The challenges, as you'll all be aware, are enormous. And you'll also know how the challenges are multiplied for the most vulnerable communities who are already suffering the double burden of COVID-19 and the impact of climate change. In urban areas, the poor, or the B40, are marginalised. They need help and support. Many non-state actors, including NGOs and youth groups, have been giving this support. And now, of course, that support is needed more than ever before as we go through a third wave of COVID cases. And as you know, the CMCO has been imposed in a number of places in Malaysia, including in the Klang Valley. So as countries recover from this pandemic, this is also an opportunity to build back better, to lay the foundations for sustainable and inclusive growth. Collective international action is vital, and the UK will lead work on recovering better for sustainability at the specific request of the UN Secretary General. But make no mistake, climate change is already here, and as its impact intensifies over time, it of course is the children and the young people of today who will face the worst effects over time. But far from being passive victims of all of this, we've seen a really interesting phenomenon over recent years, which is that young people have begun to fight back on a scale never seen before. Take Greta Thunberg. In 2018, that 15-year-old from Sweden sparked a global movement of school-age students demanding greater action from governments to fight climate change. And now millions are marching to demonstrate their support. And whether through education, technology, science or law, young people far and wide are using their skills to speak up for climate action. And I would say that you are the last generation that can effectively tackle climate change. The UK is in a unique position and has unique responsibilities as we head towards COP26. And we are committed to helping young people take action to prevent climate change and protect the future of our planet. And we're doing this by raising youth voices on the climate crisis and by increasing youth participation to address climate change. And in doing this, we're supported also by the Italian government, who are particularly focusing on increasing the youth voice for COP26. Now, as stated in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, even those under the age of 18 and voting age have the right to participate in the decision-making processes that impact on them. And that, of course, must include matters as serious as climate change. This is morally also the right thing to do. And I hope platforms like this provide young advocates with inspiring and original insights on issues like climate change that matter to them. In the UK, we're also promoting our young climate activists across our social media challenges, giving them access to our followers. And that kind of advocacy is vital to build a better, stronger future for us all. So we support youth to advocate with their governments and in their national context across the world. In the UK, we launched our 25-year environment plan in 2018. This commits the British government to take all possible action to mitigate climate change. It also sees that action as a way to achieve the audacious ambition at the heart of the plan, which is to be the first generation to leave the environment in a better state than which we found it in. The climate strike movement among school children in the UK shows not only that young people put this issue at the top of the agenda, and I hear this regularly from my own teenage children, but also that young people are prepared to do something about it. And the politicians and political parties that embrace and capitalise on this youth movement will be far more powerful than those that don't. In fact, I'd go further and say it's essential for any political party today to embrace this. There are opportunities also for NGOs. Climate change offers them the opportunity to enlist a new generation of young people who are outraged at the risks to their future, and perhaps to reframe this debate in ways that will mobilise more than just the usual activists. It's less about the environment and more about the future of the new generation and the planet that you are about to inherit. And the same goes to the generation of youths in other fields of work, in politics, civil service, engineering, law, science, technology, sociology, teaching and business. You all have skills and abilities that you can bring to this debate. You're connected. You're making positive use of these skills to build relationships within your communities, between nations and across the globe. You care. You want your nations to be cleaner, your planet to be greener, your friends and neighbours to be treated fairly and with respect, no matter what their ethnicity, their religion or their social status. You're optimistic. The complicated challenges we all face, climate change, inequality and conflict, they don't discourage you. Rather, they inspire you to persevere and to effect real change. I'm sure it's the young people of today who are going to lead the world's response to climate change. After all, you're the ones who are experiencing it daily, and we must do more to make the changes that you're advocating a reality and truly move the dial. And the young are increasingly important. When you look across the Commonwealth, for example, more than 60% of the population of the Commonwealth is under the age of 30. And at 1.4 billion strong, it's you who are going to change the world. As High Commissioner here in Malaysia, I'm very fortunate in being able to travel around the country and meet a wide range of people. And the young adults I've met across Malaysia over the last 18 months have shown me time and time again that your generation understands something very important, that to tackle a big challenge, you need to focus on the root causes, not on the symptoms. Now that's something that sounds obvious, and yet it's something that society still struggles with. This is what I've learned from people like Wen Chun Chia, a Malaysian environmentalist who wanted to persuade people to behave more responsibly in how they live their lives. She knew that the practice of pouring used household cooking oil into drains was badly affecting the water supplies to whole communities across Malaysia. She knew that just telling people to stop doing this wouldn't work. So she set about changing this behaviour by offering free soap in exchange for used oil. And she now recycles this used oil into eco-cleaning products and candles, which are sold back into the communities. This is just one fantastic example of how one young Malaysian has changed mindsets and has tackled an issue at its root. I'm very lucky. As High Commissioner, I get these opportunities to meet many talented young people. I'm working now to plan my third year in this role, and I'm working very closely with my Italian opposite number, who, as I said before, is leading on youth engagement on COP26. We need to work together to make sure that COP26 achieves maximum impact. As I say, I believe, and I truly do believe, this is our last chance to resolve this problem. I'm here to support you in whatever you want to do in this area. And I'm really pleased that the UK High Commission is supporting UNAM youth in this event. I wish you all an insightful fireside chat session with Mr. Hamdan and with Ben. Thank you very much.
Thank you to His Excellency for his amazing speech. As Vice President of UNAM Youth, I really do believe that the youth can, and in some ways already has, contribute to the fight against climate change. Now, to kick off tonight's session, I'll pass the microphone virtually to Benjamin.
Thanks, Jonathan. Passing the mic virtually. I remember, I think, in this new day and age of all these virtual conferences and events, I remember most recently hearing the expression, "The screen is now yours," instead of "the floor is now yours," and it's just interesting as a kind of reflection of how much things have changed in such a short amount of time. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to UNAM Youth and the British High Commission in Malaysia for the kind invitation. Let's get right into it. As His Excellency the High Commissioner introduced, I am a Chevening Scholar. In my year in Scotland at the University of St Andrews, I had the pleasure of being in a class comprising 17 nationalities, in a class of only about 30 plus. And one of the things that I learned there is that climate change is very much a global phenomenon, but it has very, very local flavors and it expresses itself differently in different parts of the world. So, Hamdan, I think to just kick us off this evening, could you help us locate climate change in the Malaysian and Southeast Asian context, particularly? Over to you.
Ben, first of all, thank you very much. And I think it's wonderful to join. I think it's called a fireside chat, but obviously we don't have a fireside. Neither are we sitting side by side to chat. But I guess in this virtual world, we will do as best as we can to make this an interesting session. Maybe let me start with a short context-setting presentation that will allow us to then locate this conversation a bit more intently. I hope all of you all are able to see the screen. Ben, is the screen clear?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think as we speak about climate change, as we speak today, the language of climate change today has changed from talking about change rather to emergency. And I think as Excellency the High Commissioner has said that the action is needed today, and it is in this context that I think the conversation has to focus about the climate emergency that we are faced with. Climate emergency, unfortunately, is not an apocalyptic event. And I think as much as we all would, maybe looking to something in a very distant future, it is not as such. Rather, it's right in front of us. We experience it in everyday lives, whether it's flooding, storms, crop failures, fires, disasters. These are commonly occurring events that now we are seeing year in, year out. In fact, some of us see it on a more frequent basis in our own home countries and so on. This is an image of a NASA image of a time lapse that shows how much and how fast we are losing, how fast the Earth is heating up, and how fast we're losing our Arctic snow. And what does that mean? Essentially, it means that the world is heating up, and it is fundamentally heating up as a result of human activity. And this heating up has been heating at an exponential rate. In fact, they say the world is on fire, and so much so that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was quoted saying, "Climate change is the biggest threat the world faces, and we must act now." Now, unfortunately, while we hear everyone speak about climate emergency, it is right in front of us and so on. But that sense of urgency, unfortunately, is not present in our everyday life. It seems to be always to be a distant event, and Malaysia is no different. These are some additional data points to talk about carbon intensity, where we see the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has gone, in all of human history, it was within a particular range, but within our lifetime, this has gone out of control. And this is one of the big issues that is being dealt with now. As a result of the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmospheric, and we are now seeing an increase in temperatures. As a result of temperature increase, we are seeing various other climate change events around us. So these are some data points. I think many of you would probably be familiar. Since we started felling trees, nearly 46% of trees in the world has been felled. Climate change, nearly 8% of current species, and more than 32 species are threatened with extinction. So our own human civilization is at risk of being periled. And I think that's going to be the kind of challenge and mindset that maybe we need to understand these issues and so on. Now, where does Malaysia locate in all of this? This is a projection from UNFCCC that talks about what is the kind of impact that Malaysia will face. In fact, this projection indicate that Southeast Asia and South Asia are one of the 3 most vulnerable regions in the world, and it is disproportionately affected by climate change, by virtue that these areas are going to become far much more hotter. In fact, the temperatures that we are going to experience are never before been experienced by any one of us in our lifetime or any lifetime before us. In the case of Malaysia, it is going to have a significant economic impact. Within the next 30 years, we probably see our GDP can decline by 6%, and within 2000, that number is expected to reach 12% as a result of the negative impact of climate change. Now we already feel it right today. We already face heat, extreme heat and humidity. In fact, temperatures in our urban cities have increased tremendously. The mean 30 years ago, the mean and the max temperatures in our cities used to be in the range of 20 to 28 degrees, which was probably what the equatorial temperatures were. But today, that temperatures have gone up between 22 to 37 degrees. We have seen crop failures, diseases and death has increased. Obviously, disproportionately vulnerable communities are worse affected, while flooding and we are now also facing issues about climate refugees that are right in front of us. But this is on top of what we already face. As a result of intense urbanization, we have an over-reliance on private vehicles. Traffic congestion is order of life. Our riverways are polluted. We face a major problem of air pollution from our industrial development and so on. So only what we see today is the pathway is being accelerated by our ongoing urban development challenges and so on. So with that, probably I want to end this particular first part of our conversation to say that this early warnings has been there all through time. Over the last more than 60 years, we have seen various sets of announcements and reports and committees that's been set up. Earth Day was established in 1970. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Earth Day. And in 1992, the UNFCCC was established. And all of these warnings seems to be falling on a deaf ears. As we have seen the data earlier, that it is as if that there are 3 different conversations that's going on. For the ordinary man on the street, he somehow thinks it's happening, but it's like we are slowly boiling alive. While for the businesses, it's like I don't feel anything, and the politician says, we all are just being alarmist. So it's that kind of context that we're dealing with, in the sense that we're neither ignorant, but at the same time, we somehow are ambivalent and apathetic to the context of climate emergency that we are faced today.
You spoke, Hamdan, of the climate emergency, and you used the term several times in your opening presentation. UNAM Youth ran a short poll, I think a couple of days before this, and the question was, do you think that enough is being done to address climate change in Malaysia? And a whopping 87% of respondents answered no. So I guess the question here is, with all this knowledge, with all this information that we have, why isn't enough being done? Or at least, why is it the perception that not enough is being done?
I don't know whether it's a perception. I genuinely believe that we're not doing enough as human society to deal with it, both in the context of within the Malaysia as well as in the global context. Because the reality is that the climate challenge is something that you really, in the past, or at least up to now, it was something that you couldn't really feel because it was a slow event, but over the last few years, it has intensified and now it's accelerating. And that acceleration will go into a point of what you call collision course, where our lives will become far much more difficult within the life and obviously the worst affected will be the generation to come. Amidst all the calls that is being made regards to let's deal with climate change, let's take action and so on. because the sense of urgency is not present with the decision makers, nor with with the businesses and others, because most of their actions today, unfortunately, is not accounted for, because businesses continue to pollute and create externalities. We as consumers continue to purchase and consume wantonly, and governments continue to seek growth that is not feasible, in a sense that we are growing beyond our means and living beyond our means. And in fact, the growth that we are achieving today is an unsustainable growth. And eventually this will come to naught. And in fact, it's going to come to naught much, much earlier. In fact, it's probably around the corner. COVID crisis is probably the early warning of such an event. And we all know that COVID is just a small blip, while the climate tsunami that is going to hit us is going to be far much more devastating. And the irreversibility by the time it hits us is going to be too late. And that's, I think, the reason why we have heard the Secretary General of the United Nations has been saying that there is a need for urgent action, and there is a need to ensure that there is collective responsibility in ensuring that these issues are dealt with urgency, and with the full commitment to ensure that we, at the minimum, contain and hopefully we are able to mitigate and adapt as much as possible.
I'd like to follow on what you mentioned about the statement from the UN Secretary General, and 2 years ago, how he said climate change is the biggest threat the world faces and we must act now. And I think just last week or very recently, the Secretary General himself released a statement on the UN response to COVID. And I think this year, of course, goes without saying that COVID has hogged all the big headlines. And indeed, COVID has been treated as an emergency. But almost in a parallel sense, scholars have also, for some time now, talked about flattening the climate curve. It's probably not as popular as flattening the COVID curve, which is the far more popular thing. And you have, given us these reasons as to why climate isn't treated with the same urgency, because it's much more of a slow ball in that sense. But if we could maybe look at this through the eyes of COVID, what has COVID taught us about what we're doing right or what we're doing wrong?
COVID definitely has created the notion to say that that we cannot continue to live the way we have lived all this while, or I think it's coming to become a more commonplace understanding. I can't say that everyone understands it as such, but it is becoming more commonplace for people to realize that that we human beings are accountable for what we see today in terms of the COVID crisis. COVID-19 is not an event that is was something that we could have anticipated, but rather it has been warned that such events will come as a result of man's encroachment into nature, and also the fact that eventually nature will hit us back. Now, COVID is one way it hits us back, but we have seen it also hits us back through fire, it hits us back through rain, it hits us back through drought, it hits us back through typhoons. And all of these events, intensity is becoming worse and worse and worse. Millions of people are dying, dying either through hunger or through disasters and so on. But unfortunately, as human society, the challenge is that what you don't feel, you don't react. COVID is something people feel because it's right around you. Everywhere you turn around, it feels as if that the COVID is watching you. And that sort of creates the kind of a sense of frenzy and paranoia, and that enforces people to adapt and behave. People go out today, wear a mask, we adapt to new behavioral norms, we comply to regulation, or many of us around the world try to comply to regulation. There are some groups who don't, and this is a sort of a response that you see that when death stares in front of you. But even though the climate crisis is equally a death, but that's something is more, the climate emergency is something like near present danger, still something that people feel we can catch up. Now, I think the problem is that we still can catch up is the way the conversation that takes place globally is to say there's still room to catch up. And I think that's maybe one of the problems that we are dealing with, in a sense that that there is still time to buy in and so on, even though the events of climate change is right in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about how all this has accelerated, and in fact, the signs were there. I mean, the signs and the science, was kind of pointing in the direction that this would happen is a matter of time. And if we just look at the trend, there's nothing that is completely, I mean, hindsight, surprising about all of these things. And there's also another trend that I think has also, in some ways reached a turning point in our day and age today, say compared to 20, 30 years ago, even in Malaysia. And that is the trend of urbanization. I believe the figures are definitely over 50% for the world and more than 75, coming to 80% essentially for Malaysia. And if we were to look at COVID and climate alongside this development of urbanization and the growth of cities and development of cities, how can we build resilience to climate, to COVID, to crisis through the way that we design, run, manage our cities?
What do you call, cities have become a everyday part of our life, in a sense that, let me just share with you some data points that probably illustrates this a bit more clearly. Just a moment. 100 years ago, only 2% globally lived in cities. Today, that number is close to 5. In Malaysia, that number is close to 8. So we definitely have become an urban civilization, and urbanization has become a part of how human society has progressed. This is a data point to say that our progress and prosperity is very closely tied to urban development, and as people move into cities, they also have progressed and prospered. In fact, there's no country that has gone from low income to middle income without industrializing and urbanizing. And today, 70 to 80% of the world GDP is generated in cities. And it is expected that 95% urban expansion in the next decade will take place in the developing world. So urbanization is here, cities are here, and so on. And as I highlighted, to say that cities have become a very integral part of our human civilization, and it is in cities that that we will make or break. Cities occupy less than 3% of land mass, and more than half of humanity is in cities. But at the same time, cities is also where you deal with the most amount of the climate challenge. Cities consume nearly 80% of energy produced, and it emits 75% of the carbon globally. While we also know that cities are also where you see slums and issues about air quality and so on. But cities is also where we are likely to see the possibility of making our human civilization sustainable. It's a question of how we are going to deal with making our cities to become more sustainable and livable. There are plenty of examples of such cities that are that are adopting and facing this challenge, and the cities that are being left back. Now, for those cities that are progressing, they are able to actually achieve a much more improved quality of life. They are able to deal with the issue of sustainability and face the issues of inclusivity. Now, unless and if this is done, resiliency is unlikely to be built in. And cities, if organized well, built well, and contained, if the urban boundaries are contained, where we have the right level of compactness, density, and access to services, jobs, and amenities, it will become a place where we can actually achieve both progress and prosperity, and achieve quality of life. Now, I think that's going to become one of the challenges that as human society, how do we go about doing this? Now, we are seeing around that most cities have been affected by what I call the 20th century's challenges, which is that we have created a private vehicle paradigm. We are consuming far much more than what we need. In fact, This is one of those data points that I wanted to highlight to say that, greenhouse gas emissions projections in no form of any form of climate policies is going to create a disastrous situation. But if we are able to manage and look at a pathway to reduce our greenhouse emission, we're able to also reduce our target to achieve the 1.5% pre-industrial increase in atmospheric temperatures and so on. Now, the choice is out there for us to decide the pathways that we want to choose. Now, unfortunately, I think there is a need for what you call for collective action and collaboration across all the different people, which means that you require governments and you require businesses and you require citizens to all play their part. And there is a need to rethink the growth models that we have achieved this from. We need to relook at the consumption behaviors. We can't continue to consume as much as we have been consuming in the past. As an example, a data point which I probably like to share is in the last 50 years, our meat production is increased by 4 times. That's 400%. Now, what does that mean? If increased meat production means that we need to have more areas for meat production, we need to produce more feed, we need to have more areas for agriculture, we need to take away more forests, and blah, blah, blah. So you can see the consequence of human behavior in a sense that while there has been population growth, but the per capita consumption of meat has increased tremendously. Per capita consumption has increased by 2.5 times. So even after adjusting for what you call population growth, our consumption behavior is beyond what a generation before us were able to achieve and sustain themselves. And there's a lot that we have to deal with in the sense that there's a requirement in terms of new behavioral norms. There's a need to understand that unless and if we are choosing to shift our behavioral norms, we're not going to be having any form of impact in dealing with climate change issues.
We'll come back very shortly, I think, to that. What you brought up about norms and behavior. But I'd like to maybe just rewind a bit to this point you made on compactness and containment, right, versus sprawl. And you see cities, I suppose, nearby, like Singapore or Kota Kinabalu or Penang, that to some extent have geographical limiting factors that are imposed on them. I mean, you can only build up until the sea, and after that you have to reclaim land, but that takes more effort. But how then do you make the case, for containment and compactness when it comes to cities that don't have geographical boundaries imposed on them? I mean, like KL Klang Valley, it's so easy to just build outwards. So what are ways to incentivize, containment and compactness?
I think it's both a carrot and stick in the sense that the carrot is basically incentive and mechanisms to ensure that you reward those who are complying, and those who are complying to the plan-led development trajectories and so on. The stick is that you got to also penalize those who are choosing to go away from the plan-led models. And this is where that it means that the regulatory environment needs to be strict and compliant. There should not be a room for negotiation. Now, unfortunately, I think in Malaysia is that between what we see in our statutory plans and what eventually happens on the ground, there's a huge disparity in a sense that a lot of our plans doesn't translate to reality, and there's a huge gap. And along the way, unfortunately, there is what we call there's a space that is being captured. Those who have ability to influence are able to capture those who can make decisions, and eventually those decisions are not the right decisions, and ends up that what they call the situation that we see today. Kuala Lumpur spans all the way from Tanjung Malim to Seremban, and being such a huge urban sprawl, Kuala Lumpur is now one of the most costly city when it comes to transport costs. The transport cost per capita is one of the highest in Asia. Sprawl, it becomes a negative externality to the economy, whereby it becomes a factor that affects efficiency and achieving agglomeration. So it is not only that it's affecting the environment and inclusivity, but it's also having negative impact on the economic potential. Because of the urban sprawl, Kuala Lumpur doesn't have the right kind of density per square kilometer that is required to achieve agglomeration economy. And the fact that if you don't have agglomeration, you do not get this, the X factor that results as a result of people converging into cities. So if cities are going to become large sprawls, eventually you lose the purpose of why people converge into cities. The reason why people converge into cities is to increase the levels of interaction, to increase the opportunities for transaction, to increase the ability to connect and exchange with one another. Now, being a sprawl, a lot of those factors will be compromised.
That's true. And I think while we look at how we can make cities more compact, so that you can achieve, as you said, the agglomeration economy. Maybe we can also look at the kind of space that we already have in cities. And first of all, I must say, not just because we're having a session together, but I've been a fan of Think Cities work for a while now. And I know that you do a lot of work in helping to rejuvenate urban space, to help cities to work on retrofitting and things like that. And I was just wondering if you could share a bit on some of the challenges that exist in retrofitting cities already built, and how you might and how you have overcome some of these. I mean, for instance, it's nice when you can plan a city from scratch. But when you inherit something that has like highways already built, that has certain things in certain places that it's hard to move, how do you approach that, and why is rethinking urban space so important in today's day and age?
I think the pathways forward is that I personally of the view that many of the cities that are presently today is adequate to cater for the human needs. What is probably needed is whether we are organizing ourselves effectively within the urban spaces that's available. In fact, in the case of Malaysia, there's an unlikely need for any form of continued urban expansion, particularly given the fact that Malaysia is now emerging moving into a aging society, and also the fact that our population growth is coming closer to the replacement rate, or in some parts of the country is below the replacement rate. So the need for space is actually, which is actually the commodity here. The demand for it technically should be tapering off and stagnating or coming downwards in the future, in the future years, or in the coming decade. So that's point one. Point two, which I want to affirm and say, is that that our existing city spaces, if organized well, and in this context, that if we continue the pathway today, we will be a single urban nation. Everybody wants to converge in the Klang Valley, because that's where the action is. And if you do not rethink that model into becoming a more polycentric approach or system of cities, then we are going to have a big challenge about managing our urban growth, by virtue of the fact that everyone is going to converge. And that's going to become a big challenge. And I think that's the second point, and saying that look at how do you unlock to make your other cities, by virtue of improved connectivity, whether it's through high-speed broadband or through high-speed rail and others, eventually to unlock the possibility of getting the other cities to become places where you can see new future urban growth. The third thing is that our existing cities have also got a huge amount of available unused spaces, or available buildings that are not even filled fully, or even if they are buildings that can be regenerated and repurposed. So there's a lot of void spaces. Two, there are built assets that are not optimal, because maybe they use the ground floor, they use the second floor, or they use 30% of the buildings, and so on. And the third is that there's a huge opportunity to regenerate. If you look at our collective availability of space, like I said, there is space for the residences in each of our cities. Challenge, what is it holding us back? I think as Malaysia, a young nation, there was a need for building out our cities. But now, as our population growth tapers off and we move into an aging society, there's a need for a shift in policy. I personally believe that shift in policy will be hopefully will be seen in the upcoming 12 Malaysia plan and in the next national physical plan that will chart out policies that will more look into issues about sustainable urbanism. In fact, Think City's journey essentially is rooted on sustainable urbanism. A decade ago, we felt that there's no way that we can continue to keep building new cities. Rather, we need to look at how can we regenerate and reuse. And we went over the last decade to demonstrate the fact that we can turn around city spaces that have long past their glory. In fact, revive it. In fact, that has been the story of Georgetown, where Georgetown fell into decline since 1970s, when the free port status of Georgetown was removed, and people started focusing in the industrial Penang. But since what they call the UNESCO listing and so on, the city has gone through a whole new renewal, and all of a sudden has become a go-to place. In fact, Georgetown is on a new trajectory, and we hope that the momentum will set it in motion for to help Penang revive and renew itself. And I think similarly, we have been experiencing the same journey in Kuala Lumpur, in Johor Bahru, where we have expanded our experience in our programs, and we can provide the evidence to say that our existing urban spaces can be repurposed and reused. Though there will be constraints, but a lot of these constraints with modern technology can be overcome. And in fact, a lot of evidence around the world how historic districts can be modern infrastructure can be retrofitted in historic districts, including the provision of public transport and other forms of modern interventions.
I appreciate what you were saying, Hamdan, when talking about looking ahead, right? Looking at the trajectory that we are on, and reflecting on how we're different from the younger Malaysia that kind of had to build out, and now we have to have a new kind of policy and approach to this. And I guess just moving into a bit of this, what we might call elephants in the room. Because on the one hand, there's this ideal that's backed by data, that's backed by evidence. But if we look at, how human society tends to behave, and this is very, I'm sure all our listeners today and our viewers, those who are in the Klang Valley at least, and even if you're not, you see this on the front cover of the papers, you know that we've had all sorts of water issues here, from floods to water cuts and things like that. There is this concept, or what we call like a misi banjir, a flood mission mentality, where it seems that there is an issue, there's a lot of noise about it, but then it dies down, and it's almost as if there's no long-term action taken, and we just wait for it to come again and respond to the crisis and move on. So how does that square with what you've just laid out as more long-term strategic structural thinking?
I think you're right to see that to a large extent, a lot of times that we deal with this on the mindset of a misi banjir, and by nature, human beings have a tendency to forget and forgive. Not only forget, but also to forgive. In Klang Valley, we have seen this most interesting phenomenon where every few weeks or few months we seem to be having this challenge of water availability, or we have waters getting polluted, and we seem to accept that as part of our life. We've got 7 million people or more who, one way or the other, is being affected by these issues, and we have seen how these issues have a negative consequence on human lives in a major way. Now, I think, unfortunately, even though this affects us, I'm just using the current crisis as a reflection. The call for action is, unfortunately, we never hear anybody talks about going out there on the street, or going out there to protest, or to demand their rights, or to as taxpayers, are we out there ensuring that our tax dollars are delivering the return the government and is to actually deliver services to the benefit of the citizens. And when there's a failure of that relationship, then action is needed to be taken. Unfortunately, now this is where we are now stuck with, in a sense that we have a situation where apathy has become the order of the day, and that misi banje has become our way of life, and we are prepared to accept pain. Unfortunately, this is costing us. And if can you imagine the current COVID situation if we have the same apathetic situation? And we already seen that such a situation, right? In a sense that we have seen that cases have now the daily cases have now quadrupled or tripled or quadrupled since what the cases were in March, when we had to actually go through a intense period of lockdown. And unfortunately, this has become, even the COVID thing is becoming, maybe suffering from the misi banje, and not realizing the kind of situation that we're faced with, and the actions that's required and so on. So the way I see is that, we as, I guess, Malaysians have, I know this word says that, tak apalah, or and maybe it boils. The problem is that by the time we react, it's too late, or it's not at the right moment. And I hope that that we become wiser as a result of the COVID, as well as the repeated water pollution and so on, for a more conscious and a demanding citizenry to assert and demand their rights. Because at the end of the day, a government's democracy works when there's a two-way relationship. It's not only a vote on the voting day, but to ensure that you demand your services and rights on a constant basis with the people who are leading government and so on. But coming back to what you had highlighted about the elephant in the room. So one of the elephant in the room was the issue of the consumer, who is either apathetic, ignorant, or just can't be bothered. But at the same time, the same consumer is the one who is fueling the market demand. The fact that they're apathy or can't be bothered is also getting reflected in eventually. I'm trying to relate this to the climate challenge, where we're saying that because of the consumption and demands of the consumer is fueling industrial growth. Industry obviously is in the reverse, is also then creating the frivolous consumption. As I said earlier, that we consume more than what we need on the essentials, and we consume things that we don't even need by virtue of what is being promoted out there. Now, this whole consuming behavior there's a need for a realignment, and that need the consumption, or rather the economic model that's based on the current consumption patterns and so on, is, as I highlighted earlier, is not sustainable. And that unsustainability of growth is what we're dealing with in terms of climate change. So the first elephant in the room is the fact that consumers, as us, like all of us in the world, the audience and the rest of society, we are not prepared to change and give up what we have experienced. We are not prepared to reduce our consumption. We can't say that we want to have the same lifestyle. I want to consume as much. We need to change. We need to take action at our individual selves. Failing to take action, which just means that the rest of the things will not fall into place. Businesses, which is a second elephant in the room, need to think about a new economic model. And for Malaysian businesses, we need to be mindful of the fact that the world has changing over. There's a huge commitment now towards ESG, but society is also going beyond ESGs, whereby in the most recent gathering of eminent business leaders of the world at the World Economic Forum, the conversation was about that there is a need to shift away from shareholder capitalism to a stakeholder economy. The fact that it's not all about profits. Today, businesses are externalizing the externalities, whereby the cost of externality is borne by society. The cost of pollution and the cost of overconsumption and everything else is borne by society. And when it's borne by society, it's borne by no one. Though it's paid for by everyone, it's borne by no one. And then the third elephant in the room is governments. The governments is to deliver SDGs by 2030. And the country is very far anywhere from the SDG targets. we are unlikely to achieve any of those targets that's been set by 2030 in the current trajectory. Not only the climate targets, but the rest of the targets as. Now, obviously, governments led by political leaders and probably what you call leadership in general requires also to be in the sense that just because they run between election to election, or because what they call their decision-making time cycles sometimes are very short, and then every politician will not think beyond 5 years. And when we know that actions are required over a decade or two for it to see the results, and particularly in climate. So nobody's prepared to deal with the unpopular types of action. Some of the actions will result also in the possibility of job losses in some of the industries. But then again, there is also a huge amount of opportunity that's emerging, whereby we see that as a result of the COVID, there's a great opportunity that is in front of us, a great opportunity to reset, to have a new compact between citizen and state and business, to set in motion a new conversation, a conversation that will reshape human society for the future, so that we can have a future generation. At the current trajectory, as I said, we could be facing a disastrous situation within our lifetime, or at at best within the next generation. But whether are we prepared to make the kind of compromise or realignment or forge a new compact and find ways to ensure that those who are vulnerable, who are disproportionately affected, are not ignored. Those countries that are worse off as a result of these global events are also equally comprehensive. That includes Malaysia, the issues of climate justice. So there's a lot of these new issues that also needs to be needs to be recognized and so on. In fact, maybe I'd like to share one. I have a slide here about something which I thought would be useful for everyone just to reflect of the. These are some things, but I think we will make the material available for the audience to have. But I just thought I will highlight to say that this is the kind of conversation that is now taking place in the global arena. My favorite is David Attenborough. I was enamored listening to him 4 decades ago, Life on Planet Earth. But a recent documentary which I encourage and I appeal to every citizens of Malaysia to watch, which is on Netflix, Life on Our Earth, which is actually an interesting sharing, in fact, an evidence statement by a senior citizen. He's 94 years old and has come forth to talk about what he has seen in his lifetime and his advice to the future, to the current and future generation. But then again, there's a whole range of other conversation that's taking place. The future of capitalism, reimagining capitalism, prosperity without growth. So these are the new conversations that are currently taking place. That we all need to be mindful of if we are serious about wanting to create a new narrative in forging our human society.
Thanks, Hamdan, for adding and pointing out the three elephants, as well as towards the end some of these very radical ideas in some of the books and the films that you showed. And I want to latch on to something. I mean, we'll head into Q&A very shortly, but I wanted to respond to something that you said and something that you showed us on the screen. One is that at the current rate we're going, we're not going to be able to achieve those sustainable development targets, by 2030. And the other thing was in the slide there where you showed the books, there was one there, Prosperity Without Growth. And in my year in Scotland, during the Evening Scholarship, I had the opportunity to meet the author Tim Jackson. And indeed, crazy ideas, but in so many ways, it's the kind of idea that it's so crazy that you'd be crazy not to listen to it, so very much spot on. But while in theory, all this makes a lot of sense, I just like to kind of bring us to the practicality of it. How do we promote an ethic, as you said, of contentment when the systems of the world, from education to business, is about increase and accumulation, where in many ways ideas like being more nature-based don't necessarily fit the more dominant industrial narrative?
I think, as I said, a lot of what we have seen is actually has come, the roots of it has come from the industrial age and the industrial revolution, the whole expansion for markets and the creation of this whole, what they call an economy based on consumption. And we have seen there's a very strong correlation of the climate problems also roots from there. Prior to that, our human society was reasonably in balance, and there was always that ecological, what they call sustenance, where there was a certain order and balance that was existence. And I think we have to go back to the roots. And I think essentially that, we as human society have always had the ability to sustain and have contentment. And we were able to actually progress and prosper, and we were able to achieve. In fact, the progress and prosperity is not only happening as a result of the industrial age. In fact, progress and prosperity is through all human history. It's just that the narrative of the industrial age has made it such that, that we can progress and prosper by robbing the earth and not to be accounted for it. Now, previous civilization was mindful of the fact that there was a balance that needs to be there, governed by the fact that there was a larger narrative of a belief system to say that we got to be responsible citizens of the earth, by virtue that all belief system encourages us to become good citizens, good persons to Mother Earth, and so on. I somehow believe that we broke away from that compact, where there was that compact with nature, with compact between citizens and state, and the role of business. Business was there to provide goods that is needed, as opposed to forcing people to then consume things they don't need and create profits and externalize the negative outcomes of all of this production. And that unless and if we go to a model where we're going to be creating this true cost, society needs to understand what's the true cost, and businesses have to accept the fact that they will have to go to an environment that there will not be profits. You're transacting there to recover your costs and earn some return, but not the way that returns have come about. Because most of what we have taken, now there's a lot of interesting models in this. We have seen how we can create sustainable forests. We can also create sustainable consumption. We can also create sustainable living. It's a matter of choice. The choice of moving in the pathway of adopting sustainability integrally into everything that we do, or going into the easy path of robbing Mother Earth and eventually let the problem to be dealt with by the current or future generation. So I think it's a moral question that unfortunately society has been avoiding to answer. And probably to a large extent, those voices who are answering these questions, those who are disproportionately affected by the flooding and typhoons and extreme heat, do not have a voice, don't have an ability to say their says. The guys who are taking the profits have disproportionate amount of power and ability to capture decision making and ability to direct. And this is a well-established fact. If you look at the wealth, less than 5% of the wealth in the world is less than 5% of the population in the world controls 50% of the wealth. When you live in such unequal world, and that's what we're dealing with, and I think that has all coming to naught. The crisis, inequality crisis, the climate crisis, the crisis of our morality, all of this are coming home to naught. And I think this is as I said, COVID is a reset moment. It's a warning to say about a tsunami that will hit us. Whether we are going to awake and deal with it is still a question mark.
I like how you ended that on the note of how those most affected are also in the most powerless to actually to stand up and have a voice in this. So now we move into the Q&A, and there's been some questions here, And I'd just like to take one of these questions that I think relates very closely to what you just said. And I'll present it in two parts. And the first half of it is, so in light of this, how do we give a voice to the voiceless? And the second half of this is, urban planning in many ways tends to be a top-down activity dictated by the powerful. Should more bottom-up community grassroots participation in urban planning be encouraged? And if so, how? So two parts, one on giving voice to the voiceless, and second, how do we kind of, encourage this power shift in how we design and how we kind of plan and shape our urban space?
I think on the first, I think it's basically, let's make democracy work. In a sense that we need to force that to go from the idea of saying that vote every 4 years once to vote on everything. There are countries around the world, like Switzerland, that probably votes, I believe 53 or 54 times a year. With technology, this is made to become very seamless. All of us with a touch of a button can make choices, and every citizen should be given the right to make those choices. What's the reason why politicians or businesses or someone sitting up there make a decision on behalf of the rest of society? Let the rest of society participate, provide evidence, provide the data, inform, educate, and equip people to make decisions and choices. Now, I think it's a multifaceted challenge, but it's not an impossible challenge. And there are countries that are doing this, in a sense that Switzerland is an example, where that every cantonment have their own elections regularly, and as a country they also vote on many issues on an annual basis, and that citizens' participation makes a more harmonious, engaged, conscious citizenry. And the whole idea for urbanization to work or cities to function is that citizens need to be empowered to be able to participate so that they can make the choices, because at the end of the day they are directly indirectly going to be affected, and they need to be given the right to make those choices, whether a development should be taking place, or whether a particular road should be built, or whether all of these are things that needs to be considered. But at the same time, I think it's also making sure that make that on a basis of provision of adequate information. You don't want to be in an environment where there's asymmetry of information, because and then eventually you make the wrong choices, and that's typically what happens when you're voting 4 years once. And given the nature of human beings that we like to forget and forgive, we tend to then end up being in a situation where we don't even remember what happened last week, and then eventually you make choices that are not informed. Now, on the second thing about participation, as I said, it's related to the first. That's what makes a great city. If you want to know a measure of a great city, it's the level of participation, engagement, and so on. The more you're able to get your citizens to be part of, the more happier your citizens are, the more inclusive it becomes, and the less likely that you will have strife, the less likely you will have discontentment, the less likely you will have stress. All of it eventually becomes you can either get a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, in a sense that by allowing for participation, you don't. Now, obviously, there could be interest groups that don't want such things to happen, or there could be reasons of complexity of execution. But with technology today, a lot of those things can be enabled by virtue of the fact that people can use the digital platform, and with by tools like big data tools and so on, you're able to aggregate all of those hundreds of participation and inputs and so on, eventually to come and arrive at decisions. And obviously, these are not immediately available, but these are the new pathways that we all need to chart if you want to make a harmonious society. A lot of planning has only taken place over the last less than the last 100 years. In fact, cities have become a very central part of conversations in the last 20-30 years. In fact, it's a handful of universities around. If you go to look, they would probably have a program on cities. So the conversation about cities is still an emerging conversation. It's a conversation about making. It's about conversation about becoming. And it's still a process that there's a lot of for putting together things that will help society to be more included. Benjamin, maybe I just thought I'll ask
talking
you
about how. Yes.
Now, I was just saying that I'm just reversing the role to say that, as an ecologist, I don't know how you perceive, being an economist and also I'm trained as an economist, but eventually now I've become an urbanist. I've looked from a different vantage point. I'm sure as an ecologist, your perspectives of this climate change would probably differ in a sense that, I don't know, you might feel the urgency far much more.
Yeah, I think as an ecologist, what I've noticed is that, sometimes being in Malaysia, it's both a blessing and a curse. We are so proud of our biodiversity, of our forests and all of our wildlife and our marine assets and all that. That one of the challenges when I compare to other cities is that this awareness of nature in the urban space seems to be less here in Malaysia than in other parts of the world that maybe have lost more of their natural forest. And so they find life, down around their backyard and in the neighborhoods. Whereas here, a lot of that environmental discourse tends to be focused on these pristine landscapes outside of cities. And a number of times I've had these conversations with people and they say, oh, in the city, what wildlife can there possibly be there? Why do we need to think about greenery in the city when we've got forests outside the cities? And I think you cannot just look at it from a structural point of view. Sure, we may have far more trees in the forest versus in the city, but it's also about how it relates to the social experience of the environment. And a lot of times, the way that we interact with our immediate environments, our homes, the drains outside our residential areas, those have compounding effects, on the environment, especially when there's more and more and busier urban life as cities continue to grow. So I think from the point of view of an ecologist, I don't really see that there is a sharp distinction between what some people call the urban space and the natural space, because cities are actually part of nature. Sure, they don't look like it sometimes with all the buildings and the roads, but the same ecological processes that happen in the seas, in the forests, and the mountains are also occurring in the city. And we have to see ourselves as part of that, greater and more connected whole. And I think that also comes back to what you said about how, in looking after our cities and our working and living spaces, it actually creates not only more well-being for us, but also well-being for the environment.
Yeah, we forget that what you call the human species is a continuum of part of nature, and the fact that what you call man and nature is interconnected. And as humans, we are so much more, we are a biological creation, but the way we think and act today is as if that we are a machine. We think in engineering paradigms, and we think in we think in terms of industrial thinking, as opposed to really, relating to the fact that we are a biological creation, and the fact that we are connected to nature, and there's a reciprocity and an interdependence between man and nature.
Yeah, and speaking of interdependence of man and nature, we've been speaking a lot about cities, communities, and all these things, but I also take note that this event that we're in now is co-organized by UNAM Youth, and looking at the kind of cities of the future. In many ways, the people who will inherit these cities, in 10, 20, 30 years' time. In your opinion, how can communities, especially youth, make an impact? Even though some would say that youth are very young. What are the different ways in which youth can make a lasting impact?
Well, they say that the power is in the hands of the youth, and the youth are the future of the nation. And what do you call it, in Greta Thunberg, you've got a role model that has demonstrated the kind of impact individual person can shape the global narrative, and the fact that what do you call it, the spillover effect that it's able to create. Now, if youth in our nation are able to step forward, if the youth can organize themselves and create the what I call the voice and echo out there, I personally believe that the larger narrative in the country will start shifting, because disproportionately the power of the youth, in a sense that there will be more people among the youth who will be coming into voting age, and eventually when Undi 18 materializes, you will see that even more greater number of persons of youth who have the ability to shape the direction of where the nation will go, by virtue that the power will be in their hands. I think it's about equipping themselves. One, I mean, most importantly, you got to equip yourself with knowledge, understanding. You need to, what do you call, go out there and reach out and so on. Second, I think connect with one another, create networks. Power of networks is unfortunately, so much undermined. We don't find unity among youth. We find this lack of action. In fact, we know there's a lot of conversation that takes place in the virtual world. Sometimes virtual world doesn't add up to feel it in the actual world. So it needs to be also balanced, in a sense that there's a need for what you call the virtual and non-virtual world kind of program. So that's the third thing in sense. The fourth, I would say that they could be role models of what future consumers could be. The fact that they are not in the marketplace, they can start making choices. In fact, we're already seeing that. They say that the Gen Y, Gen Z today are not attached to, they want to have asset-free lifestyles. They want to have a different type of consumption patterns. And they can go to the full extent of shifting. And the fact that if they were to shift, I think companies that are investing into the future will also rethink on the direction of what they want to provide. If the demand starts shifting, you will see that the market eventually will start to walk the talk. If the demand doesn't shift, the market will continue to fulfill what the demand is today. And I think that power of shifting the demand is now in the hands of the youth of the nation, today and in the future. Now, choice of taking action, unfortunately, it's on their hands. But like I said, every one of them will feel that they are an individual person that cannot do anything. Greta Thunberg is an example of what you could do. And eventually, with collective action, you can have greater impact. And the fact that you could also move the needle, because the power is in your hand. The power to vote, the power to make make choices, the power to not to consume, the power to be conscious, the power to celebrate a different approach to life, and shift the narrative. And I think the youth have great possibilities, and not only great possibility, but I also put great hope on them. The fact that they would be able to shift, or the way that our country has been moving. This country was once built by a young nation, a young set of leaders, and I hope in the coming years we will see another generation of young leaders that will shape the nation again.
On that, optimistic note for the future, I would just like to, close with this one last question, for this segment. And you talked about youth, how our nation was once built by young leaders, and how the youth of today can continue to shape the nation in its next chapters. And I have one reflection here on if we look at the challenges of these things. You talked about ideals and activism and things like that. How can youth confront the reality that, a lot of times if you're students, when you graduate and start in careers, we may not be able to live up to our ideals to make ends meet. We may end up, working for companies or organizations that may not have, so to speak, the best environmental practices, or we may have to, work under superiors or bosses that may not model the kind of behavior and leadership that we want to emulate. So how do we keep our eye on the true north and persevere to create change against the backdrop of all this urgency, the emergency, and this sense that tomorrow it really depends on every decision that we make today?
I think for those youth who want to have the cake and eat it, unfortunately, I think that they have lost the true north, and probably even the what they call the moral choice. I'm just being very hard here in the sense that companies today are shifting. If you were to look at the most recent data about hiring, companies are now realizing that people choose their jobs, and people choose jobs that companies that provide that has policies beyond pay and perks. They look at what the company's philosophy, moral responsibility, the commitments to environment and society, policies about ESG. I think this has become a big and important part. Now, if youth today are just going to go on the basis that I need to get a job because I've got a PTPP enrolled, I've got to go out there and survive for the family and so on. Yes, I think that the base needs of any human being is definitely needs to be addressed. But at least at the bare minimum, you need to also be conscious of what you can do, even if you need to work under constraint. But don't end up becoming that eventual consumer and citizen that becomes apathetic and lose sight of the purpose, because eventually that you will become like everyone of us. And there's a need now for us to whether it's the youth, whether it's the non-youth, people like me and you in the room. Ben, I'm told that you're not part of the youth cohort.
It depends which definition you use.
And I think it's not about just saying the youth alone, but we all have a moral responsibility, and the moral responsibility to ensure that future generations have hope.
Thanks so much, Hamdan, for all of that sharing. I think we've really covered a huge spectrum from talking about the facts around the climate emergency, looking at how Malaysia, Southeast Asia are affected, coming into cities, looking into the past, looking into the future, and I think eventually, and above all, looking at ourselves, our communities, and also ourselves as individuals. What we can do in context of the larger change that we want to make. I think in bringing this session to a close, one of the things that I always think about conversations like this is that it shouldn't end, right? It shouldn't end just because it's 9:30 and so on. So I think it would be great to keep the conversation going, and not just between the two of us, but I think with the audience that we can't see, which is one of the great challenges about having these sessions virtually. So there are, to everyone who's watching this, who's still here with us, there are a number of things that I think we would like to just highlight and bring to everyone's attention, ways that you can continue to keep in touch. First of all, do follow Think City on social media. The handles at My Think City. Lots of interesting things there, a lot of updates. And the World Cities Day is just around the corner. Hamdan, is there anything that you'd like to share with us on that?
Yeah, I probably highlight this year's World Cities Day will be taking place on 31st October, which is a Saturday. It's an interesting World Cities Day because it will during this particular day, there will be a launch of the World Cities Report, the State of Union address about where cities are today, and this will be done by the Executive Director of UN Habitat. This event will be taking place in Penang. We will be broadcasting it live, and we hope that you'll be able to join and participate in the events that will be taking place during the day. But more importantly, I think, as Ben, you highlighted, we want this conversation to be a conversation that continues. So on this part, I think what we will commit to is to see how we can keep this conversation going with UN Youth, with UNDP, and also other interested partners with the High Commission, and also that we hope that we can actually rally in, so that we can build a community of what I call community of not only believers, but a community of people who want to act, a community of people who want to shape the new narrative, and also a community of people who hopefully can live and walk the talk as much as possible.
Thanks, Hamdan, for your time for the sharing. Just before I hand this over back to our hosts, I'd like to make two very quick announcements. And on that note, when you talk about keep the ideas coming, the narrative, and all these things, we have an ongoing competition that's co-organized by Think City, UNDP, MIT, and University Malaya. And it's called the Kisah Futures Competition. If you go to Think City's social media, you will find it there, Kisah Futures Competition, and it's basically a short story competition about imagining the cities of the future. It's open till 31st October, so very easy to remember. World Cities Day, 31st October. 31st October is also the deadline for the competition. And we are accepting entries in both Bahasa Malaysia and also English. So please do spread this news among your contacts, your friends, your family, colleagues, and do take part yourself if you're able to. We would really love to hear your ideas, and I think in many ways it's ideas that shape how we design our futures. The second thing, I won't presume to know too much about this, but I believe the Achieving Scholarship application window is currently open. I believe it's open until sometime early November. So just a nod back to the British High Com, for having us on the air today. It's a fantastic opportunity if you've ever thought of studying in the UK and also developing your career. I really encourage everyone who might be considering studying abroad in the UK and also developing yourself professionally, tapping into a great network to consider applying for the Achieving Scholarship. So on that note, thanks again, Hamdan, for the chat. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think I really enjoyed having this conversation, and I hope that we can have future conversations, and hopefully that these conversations become a larger part of the narrative of Malaysia.
Thank you. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much. I guess I get screen time now. Thank you very much to our speaker, Mr. Hamdan, and also Benjamin, our moderator for tonight. There is one other way to keep the conversation going as I follow. That is to actually join UNAM Youth. We are recruiting at the moment, so do head on to our social media. That is una.malaysia for Instagram, and just search up United Nations Association Malaysia. That's on Facebook. You can also be able to tune in to this program on Facebook as well if you want to share it out to your friends. So it's fully available right after this. The session itself was really insightful tonight, and I think that I've actually learned a lot, especially upon getting rid of my tidak apa attitude. There are three things that I actually took note of. Number one would be the interdependence between man and nature, that we should not think of ourselves as separate from nature, but rather an extension of it. And because of that, there's this interplay, and that means that we have to be responsible with it. Number two would be to rethink the way we use unused spaces and to aim for sustainable spaces that we can inherit and use in the long run. The third thing, and this is very much related to UNAM Youth, is that the youth have the tremendous power to shift the demand and change the narrative. And because of that, we have the power to move the needle. Now, I do not think that we have the power in the future. I actually think that we have the power to do it now, today, with our choices that we make. So if you are interested, do join UNAM Youth to sort of further the conversation in it. But beyond that, all of us can play a different role in this fight for climate change. And if we just take a step back and think about what each of us can possibly do, rather be it something rather small to something rather grand, we will all move the needle together. So thank you very much. Good night.